Okay, but by the by, it's completely your choice. So you do the work and get a pass. Don't do the work and see me next year. Absolutely your choice. Today I want to talk to you about institutions of knowledge and what is happening, really kind of future thinking about the institutions, including in Vietnam. Really? This is going to be really hard without the slides, that's for sure. No signal. Source detect. All right. All right, let me know if it disappears. So this is a course on critical thinking. And we just had the week off for midterm and you were examined. And I thought, okay, how can I test for critical thinking? How can I test and decide whether critical thinking... Now, I think I already told the story about my employer in the University of London. He the boss, the president, we call him a warden, which actually is weird because that's the name for the head of a prison. But the warden said, because we had 14 departments or so, and they're all doing some kind of arts or culture or geography, sociology, psychology, and there were 7 courses in the different departments on critical thinking. And he said, why do we have so many? Why can't we have just one? Because put them all together, just have one teacher, 6 people can go and be unemployed or whatever, can find other work. But you know, critical thinking has many different versions. All right, so my version maybe is influenced mostly by Hani and Moten, Spivak, maybe Adorno a bit, right? Other people might be more influenced by Marx, well, me too, but or psychology, or the British cultural studies tradition, right? Stuart Hall and Paul Gilroy and Angela McRobbie. Right, so there are different ways to do critical thinking. And how much would you, what would be enough? Should you just do one course? Or in fact, should every course have critical thinking? I mean, if you think about it, the idea of having a separate course for critical thinking doesn't make that much sense because everything in the university should be critical thinking, right? Not criticism of, although that's an important part, but thinking critically, thinking about the really important issues on every topic. Whether it be a skill topic like how to write, you're going to think critically about what you do about writing, or something about the history of the 17th century. Of course, there are different interpretations and you have to think critically of them. So why would there be one course separate? Why would there be 7 courses on critical thinking? Some will call critical theory. He didn't understand the difference, the boss. And then, shouldn't all courses be critical thinking? I don't know the answer, of course. I'm just putting it there as a question so you think about what is it that we're trying to get out of this course, critical thinking. Why did the people who put together the program for this degree that you're doing, bachelor's degree, why did they think it necessary in this year for you to have a course on critical thinking? Was there not enough critical thinking in the other courses? Do you need extra shot of critical thinking to improve your skill? What is this course supposed to do? And how will I know when you are critical thinkers, are thinking critically? How would I be able to even test for that? Since we had exam week last night, what am I going to test? Like, yeah, you have a pulse. That means you can think. That means you can be a critical thinker. That's why you get injected by the critical thinking boost. No. What do I do to test if you're thinking critically? A little bit of a frown, must be thinking critically. But she could be faking it. She could just be pretending to think critically. Or you might be thinking critically in the wrong way. What would be the wrong way? What would be the wrong way to think critically? John is a bum. Yeah, that's thinking the wrong way. Anything that shows disrespect. No. How can I test? How can I test you, examine, to see if you've got the capacity or the skill or the habit? I think it should be a habit of critical thinking. I actually even worry that maybe critical thinking, what we do in universities, is slightly a little bit sad because you lose something. When someone or something you've read or someone you're taught by shows you how those Disney films or Hollywood romantic dramas or whatever that you really love are cynically constructed according to audience survey and a pattern, and they follow the same pattern, they have a structure which we can analyze. Once someone starts to analyze those things that you love and enjoy to watch, maybe you can't enjoy them in the same way anymore. Once you are turned on to critical thinking, how can you watch, I don't know, Transformers or something and not recognize CGI, which is an investment by American technology firms how can you stop that critical thinking which interferes with just pure pleasure of enjoying? Maybe you can do both, but maybe not. Maybe you lose some, I don't know, maybe that's a bit sad to lose your innocence. Like, I'm not saying that this course makes you lose your innocence, critical thinking, right? But somewhere along the line in university, you start to think the entertainment industry, the culture we have, it's so much rhetoric. It's so much calculated, manipulated. Like people in offices thinking, how can we get their emotions invested in this? And that means that when you do invest your emotions, you do a step back and think, I see what's happening there. And once you start to do that, can you really enjoy romantic drama as much when you know it's completely to a formula? In fact, I think in Hollywood cinema, romantic drama, nothing new since the 1940s, really. Maybe some new things, I don't know. I don't watch that many. But how can I tell? I mean, maybe in that path, loss of innocence and cynical or critical approach to media, I can see that, yeah, you're a bit sad and depressed, so that must be critical thinking. If you are not sad and depressed about the way the world is, maybe you're not thinking hard enough. War and pollution and the end of the planet and Donald Trump. But at the other side, we have a responsibility not to be beaten down to be defeated by this. How can I measure for that? We cannot. Like, I know there's thinking going on, but of what kind? There's no way to say. No way to say for sure. You could speak back to me, I mean, this would be plagiarism, but you could speak back to me exactly the words of Theodore Adorno. Would that mean critical thinking? It might, but it might also mean just you have learnt a piece of theatre. So there's no measure. What can we do though? Can we put people in the way of critical thinking? Can we, like the plan for the degree that you're doing, somebody thought this is how we get the students to become sociologists, scholars, are able to handle not just data and information, but to be able to manage and use and manipulate, think critically about data and information, to able to have the skills to be able to really research deeply into a topic and so on. Well, we thought that a course on how to do that would be important, but the very idea of making people think in a certain way is a bit strange. And how does it work in institutions as a whole? I mean, that's what the university really is set up to do. It's a place where we hope to make people think. For me, we hope to make people think differently than they did before, because that's the whole point. Now, of course, there are all sorts of questions about what it is to set up institutions and how you get knowledge to work. And especially when it's got to do with government making these decisions, how we get the institutions to work in the interest of the nation or humanity as a whole, or what have you. How do you get everyone in the different knowledge industries to think? So right, in this course, one way to do it is through reading. There are many forms of discussion and ways in which we talk about doing it. I think actually the classroom and the lecture is only one, and not always the most successful. Yeah, it can work when someone stands up and thinks out loud as a kind of illustration for emulation, but very much I believe that if you don't read the work that is being discussed in a lecture, you won't grasp the issues. Actually, I believe even more important is that among yourselves, you should organize that reading. Reading groups, we call them. Where you and a few friends say, well, this book seems to be really interesting, but I can't really grab it by myself. I can't grasp it by myself. Let's read it and meet to discuss. Okay, that's another institutional form. Putting people together. Now, departments effectively are that. Putting people together to work on the same issue and talk to each other and create a frisson. Strange English word. Frisson. I really like this word. Frisson is like a bubbling up of excitement. Not that much excitement happens in departments in a university very often, but the idea is you get your thinkers together and they inspire each other. A frisson of excitement over Marx or over the sociology of the family or whatever, right? Any topic. How do we create that? We build institutions. We build departments, we have reading groups, we have seminars, we have conferences, especially conferences like the one we had last October. Now I see because of Facebook does this here memories you can keep. Last year, a lot of people are reposting images from the conference last year. Obviously, it was successful. And the book of the conference just came to my desk this morning. It gives you a feeling that something happened. And that's great, but at the same time, there's an element of that we should think critically about as well, because it ends up being kind of propaganda. The department has to do some propaganda, sure, to let you know about it. You wouldn't come to TDTU if TDTU didn't do some advertising. But we should also be questioning advertising for universities. Propaganda, promotion. That's why I've asked you to make brochures, right? To think about what is in your brochure and what is the process by which the institutions of knowledge then become marketed, commodities, advertised, and for sale. Because on the one hand, there's that, the boosterism, boosting, promoting, you know, T-shirts and little cups with the logo on and so on and so forth. Badges with TDT logo on. And then on the other side, there's critical thinking, which takes time, research, which takes, you know, effort, time, and even mistakes. An important part of research is going wrong, actually. And you can't really advertise that part. I mean, that's one of the things that you don't hear that much and you don't see in the brochure, the amount of time researchers don't know what they're doing. Really get things wrong. I mean, because they're experimenting, right? And sometimes you experiment, you try and understand something, find the structure of a film or the analysis of some microbes or something, and you go down the wrong track. That's a process of elimination. There's even a theory about it, falsification. If your knowledge can't be proved wrong, it's not really knowledge, it's rhetoric. Karl Popper, I mean, that's a simplification, but something like that. So you've got these two competing drives. One, the happy boosterism of the institution. Two, the institution trying to put people together to think and the messy activity of thinking. Not really always knowing what you're doing. You're searching for something you don't quite know whether you'll find it. And the importance of failure, actually, for research is really under-theorized. We should think about that and not be afraid to fail. In fact, some of the greater, I used to teach visual anthropology, right, filmmaking, and people would go and do projects. And sometimes the projects that were best were the ones where they talked about the process of trying to make a film and it didn't work. They still made the film, right, but it didn't work like they imagined it would work. But then they did a critical thinking analysis of why. And they were sometimes the best. More honest, more insightful, more revealing of all the processes of making and representing and developing images. Good stuff. But okay, critical thinking. At what time do we decide to apply this skill, this tool, critical thinking? Is it something that you could like just pull out of a packet and apply? Is it an ingredient you pour in? Is it something that I lift off your head and pour into you? And that model of making tea is not a good metaphor for thinking. But reading and reading groups, I think, sure. From this week, actually last week, but going on, we're going to do more practical work. So especially how to write, how to research, and making things, like I did ask you for the midterm to make a brochure. And I want to put it to you that we actually put these things together into a project and publish them to make a book of the work you do. Not everything we would decide, because otherwise it would be too huge and big, but some of the better things we could put into a booklet on our imaginary university or something like that. I want to put it to you as an idea, and I wonder if you are interested in that, if you're keen to do it. All right? So you've been asked to develop an assessment of the university as you see it, and I want to set you another task that might feed into a future publication. Instead of a reading for the next 2 weeks, because we're going to do the readings in class next week and the week after, and we'll have more practical assignments like how to quote and things. I want to set you all a new task in the next 2 weeks. You can do it in groups of up to 3 or 4 again. It can be the same groups that you used before or new ones, where you will go out into the community of the university and find someone to interview about their idea about the ideal university, someone who works here, and they will probably talk about TDT. They might even just give you the approved version. They might give you a critical version. They might not have enough time. They might not want to talk to you. They might be too busy working. Right? But I want you to go out and try to get, you might fail, right? Try to do an interview with someone who works, who contributes their labor to the running of the university, who is not a teacher. Not a teacher. So talk to the people who do not do teaching. And not the president, he's busy, a bit occupied, let's say. He's always busy, but even more so right now. But someone, whether it be the guy that helps you cross the road when the traffic's it's always a bit crazy, or someone who works in Kituksa, or the gardening ground staff, talk to them about their idea of the ideal university that they would like to work in. All right, and come back to me with your group doing a half-page report on that interview. Just one person. You can interview them in Tingviet because many of the workers won't have English, right? If they're ground staff or something, I shouldn't assume they might have better English than me, many. But someone who is not a teacher, who contributes their labor to make TDT work. I hope you're thinking through who that might be. You can ask me if it includes, I don't know, the people who work on the other side of the road in the cafe restaurant thing. Yeah, I guess. Does it include the bus driver? Yeah, marginal, but yeah, I suppose he's on the university route. He, she. But mostly there are lots and lots of workers on this campus, hundreds in fact. And quite often we maybe don't notice them in the same way as you notice the teaching staff, because they have badges and sometimes white shirts, right? And you do this as your project, and it lasts 2 weeks, and then we're slowly building up a whole repertoire of pieces of text and images that I want to suggest to you these reports could become part of a publication project. like, not a newspaper, but something like a magazine about the idea of a future university that everyone will get then as a document. If anyone is opposed to that idea, they should say and have a reason. But I think it's going to be interesting and fun. And you produce something that you can take away. So for the next few weeks, actually for the rest of the course, I'm proposing that we make out of all these exercises and your reports, maybe some of them are so good, some of them are really good, so yeah, I would say yes. Reviews and your images, the brochure, and in the other class, the maps. The other class didn't do brochures like this class, they did maps, and we put them all together into either one or two publication, I think one, I'm not sure, which we then get printed up. Not for distribution into the world because that will cost a lot of money, but enough for everyone to get a copy. So there are about 120 of you, so 120 copies at least, maybe 150 if we can then give some to the department or whatever. Maybe present one to the people who decide what the university should look like. And I mean your imaginary university. Now, I've been looking at some of the university. Quite often, your ideal university, the drawings of them, from the other class at least, and I haven't seen the maps, the brochures, but I hope we can look at them in the second half today. Quite a lot of them weren't as imaginary as I sort of imagined. So we can start to think how to push that. Quite a lot of them, in fact, from the other class, the drawings they did of the shape of the university looked very much like TDTU, actually. Is that their ideal university? Well, great, you're here, welcome. But anyway, we can choose the best ones of those and reproduce them. Printing nowadays is not that expensive. The real cost is distribution. I don't think we can make enough to distribute, right? But still. I think in doing something like that, there's also a frisson of enthusiasm can come from that. I've done it before with classes many times. Where I'll show you some examples. I can't show you the physical example because they're in England, but I've shown you the map, right? That was an example of a project that produced something. The Queen Mary map project. I'm suggesting we'll produce this time a booklet, brochure, magazine, something like that. Maybe 100 pages or something. Which will include some of the images and some of the text. But the idea of doing this is to create this frisson, this sense that we have a project, and that's what I want to talk about today. How does the national knowledge effort create enthusiasm, create the conditions for thinkers to really grab hold of ideas, and how do we organize knowledge in the city to work better than it does? And one way that universities have done this worldwide is through a topic that I want to go back to from, if you remember, the culture course, and possibly you don't. In 1 week of the culture course, there was a section on education, and I talked about science parks. Does anyone remember it? I'm not surprised. It was your first year. I talked about the multimedia super corridor in Malaysia. in Kuala Lumpur, and Prime Minister Mahathir, and he launched that multimedia super corridor, which was a science park idea, and he launched it in Los Angeles, and it was going to bring Malaysia into the 20th century, 21st century, with his 2020 vision, he called it. So it should have happened all by now, this year. Imagine having a vision of this year in 1997 when he did that. The year that it turned out to be. But I want to go back to this topic of science park, because the idea of a science park, the fundamental idea of the science park is bringing researchers together and getting them to work better for the nation because they are together in a park. So today I'm going to talk about science and technology parks and how governments and university managers arrange institutions to make knowledge happen, to make it really advance. Now, the ideal example of this is the success of the Manhattan Project. Does anyone know what the Manhattan Project was and what it did? No? So the Manhattan Project was led by a man called Oppenheimer, German name, but he was working in America, Manhattan, right? Gives you a clue. But they actually moved the project to a place called Los Alamos, a school in Texas, a former school, actually a summer school, like a place where they took kids on summer holidays for like training camps. So it was a whole lot of cabins with bunk beds and so on, and then places for recreation where they would do bonding games and so on. Anyway, during World War II, this place was closed down and was occupied by the military, and they moved the Manhattan Project to there. They set up security all around it so no one could get in without authorization. It was top secret. And in the Manhattan Project, teams of researchers worked intensively, like 24/7. Of course, they had some recreation and food, and their wives were there, and there was bars and drinking and so on. But they worked intensively to try and win the war, World War II, by developing a super weapon, the mother of all bombs, the atomic bomb. The Manhattan Project was the atomic bomb project, research project, which eventually was called Big Boy and Little Boy, and was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing hundreds of thousands of people. But how did they do it? They developed this bomb, the atomic bomb, through research, getting their different specialists in different kind of areas of research, delivery, fusion, trigger mechanisms, getting them all together and working intensively in this research lab. And it was a huge success. Curiously, Los Alamos is the school that William Burroughs, the writer, went to, and he's one of my favorite writers, so that's why I know about this stuff. But, and it's a TV serial now as well you can watch. That's not great. But the Manhattan Project was the first successful think tank. Think tank is like science park, right? You're thinking, but you're in a room, in a tank, in a science. You're doing science, but you're in a park. The whole idea is get your scientists together in close proximity in a quite pleasing environment to make them feel happy to be together, and then they have better ideas talking to each other, rather than sitting separately in their labs trying to invent something but really spending all their time on Nintendo or Facebook or something. What scientists do when they're on their own is very different to what they might do if they, I got it. if they are in a group, inspiring each other. And so the idea is you bring your scientists together into a park or really well-appointed labs or into a beautiful campus, and then they will do better work. Right? It's like engineering thinking, the mind. The classic examples of this are the Manhattan Project, which gave us the atomic bomb, and then the aerospace industries to the south of Los Angeles. Right, there's a whole number of aerospace, Lockheed Martin and all the big aeroplane companies that developed jets for the war effort in World War II, and then developed commercial applications for those jets, made the airline industry, which was dominant until this year. And the other one is Silicon Valley, microchip production, and that's an area around Palo Alto, near San Francisco. It's really beautiful, rolling hills, nice place to live, and that's where the Google campus, the Microsoft campus, and all those places are where microchip innovation happens. And they are like the models of the science parks. And they are so successful, Silicon Valley, that we now see them reproduced all over the world, where national governments and universities think we need one of those. We need to have a science park. So like the first one outside of America was, I think, Heriot-Watt in Scotland. And then there was Aston Science Park, Cambridge Science Park. So, and the idea here was, what is that? I wasn't even going to touch that one. The idea here is that you would build a new research facility near a university, because then all of the things that the university gives, like a good library and parking and catering and so on, would already be there, and you just build these new interdisciplinary labs where the scientists can come. Right? And in fact, there was like, well, the last time I looked at the numbers, what do you need, brother? The last time I looked at the numbers, he's just checking to see I'm not saying bad things. The last time I looked at the numbers, there was like 395 science parks in the world, and that was about 10 years ago. There's probably many more, and in fact, we'll see the ones for Saigon City. Silicon Saigon, well, I can't remember exactly what it's called, is well developed as well. The idea behind them comes from a Japanese guy called Konichi Ohmae. Ohmae, I'm not sure. Ohmae. He worked for MIT Hitachi and then McKinsey. I mean, he did all sorts of things. But his idea was to make a multifunction city, like a place for scientists to work together, which would also be a total environment for them. So they would never have to leave. There would be restaurants and housing and a cinema and golf course and so on. Everything to facilitate their work, to make it really smooth, so they will spend more time with each other inventing new things for the nation. Right? And you don't want your scientists working alone in a lab. I mean, this is the model. I think sometimes working alone is necessary, but you want them working on projects for you with that kind of drive of emulation to encourage each other to do better. Right? If their scientists are separate and isolated, they can get depressed or sidetracked or just spend all their time on Facebook. If you have them challenging each other, pushing each other, like in a race with each other to find new answers, you get better results, so the theory goes. And this is true because MIT introduced just-in-time production and diversified production and really helped make Japan and other places in Asia essential to globalization. To a degree that often the globalization theorists don't really talk about enough, how important just-in-time production and across Asia, the adoption of these production methods was essential to the new commodity chains of globalization. And that goes back to this think lab of Kenichi Ohmae. Although not only him, but his idea really was contradictory. It was to get technology and those who develop technology into a park. This is the contradiction in my first published cartoon joke. But this manifests in various ways. In Australia, there was an example in Sydney called the Australian Technology Park, or the Advanced Technology Park, that was schemed up by the three vice-chancellors of University of Sydney, University of New South Wales, the state in which Sydney is, and University of Technology Sydney. And they wanted to have one of these Silicon Valley-like science parks. Okay. They allocated an old part of a rundown part of the city and bought it for the university. It just so happened to be the area where Aboriginal people live, and they wanted to move them out. They appointed Tom Forgan, who was like an entrepreneur, and he said, well, we've just got to get rid of the poor people. But anyway, they built in Everleigh rail yards a facility for this advanced technology. Why has that happened? Stop that. That's the one. If that changes again, please let me know. They built this facility hoping that they would kickstart technology development in Australia so that Australia would become the clever country. Now, this is a signal for you as analytics, right? When you see a phrase like that, clever country, you think, wow, they were so happy when they thought that one up, weren't they? Clever country sounds good. But usually it doesn't have any content very often. The idea of the Labor Party, as it was then, the Australian government in the 1980s, early 90s, creating a clever country was kind of mad. Although they did invest a lot in building up universities and getting university enrollment up to 50%, right? That was becoming clever or educated. But it was university privatization, because really what was happening was the departments, the science departments, the laboratories and so on of the university were being opened up to industry, because it's industry that locates on the science park. The idea is for the national good, you get your scientists to collaborate with industry to develop new products, new innovations, invent new things. But the thing about companies, corporations, is their attitude to knowledge is necessarily quite different to the idea of a university. The university, we have fairly, not completely, fairly open access to knowledge. Anyone can come into the university if they pass the right thresholds, get the right undergraduate, school pass mark and have enough money to pay the fees and so on. But really anyone can access knowledge. It's published in a mostly open way. Yes, you have to buy the books or whatever, but it's the idea is that it should be knowledge for all. But from a company point of view, if you innovate some knowledge and produce something that's going to be a cutting edge technology, You do not want to share that knowledge. It is not in the interest of a company to share knowledge. The university is all about sharing knowledge. That's how we teach. That's how we do research. A company gets researchers to sign non-disclosure agreements, to be contractually obligated to produce their innovations and their knowledge for the exclusive use of the company so that company can get an advantage in the market. Because, right, if they made their source code or their ideas, their innovations publicly available, somebody else would do it a bit cheaper and they wouldn't make any profit. So their fundamental reason for working is opposed to the so-called ideal of the university. Now, of course, we can criticize both. There are companies that are a bit more open, and in fact, there's the idea of technology transfer and so on. And in a science park, this idea is quite important. There are some thinkers about the science park, not Tom Forgan, but others like Peter Hall and Emmanuel Castells, who talked about, in a book called Technopoles of the World, I think I'll refer to it in a bit, they said, right, the successful science park is one where you have a major company locate there, and they are like, and here's the metaphors again that are funny, they are like going to be the mother hen looking after the little chicks. The little baby chickens are going to hatch out of eggs because there's an incubator, a big company that then allows the spin-off little companies to exist. Right? If you don't have a big company making your science park a success, all you've got is a whole lot of small companies that don't really have the momentum to develop those ideas. The ideas might be there, but the marketing structures, the investment capital, the habit of getting things into the market wouldn't be there. And those companies then are doing a little bit of technology transfer to their chicks, so to speak. They actually talk about it in terms of incubator, right, which is a way in which we look after hatching eggs. Yeah, here's the thinking thing. Kenichi Ohmae had popularized the theory, but it was already there in Marx, that the innovative part of your production is the new ideas that give you that opportunity to be the first one into a market, and then others see, eventually there's some technology transfer, they see what you're producing, they produce equivalents, right? iPhone then is replicated by other smartphones that enter in the company, and your profits slowly decline. Rate of profit falls. And that was already analysed in volume 3 of Capital. But thinking about it in terms of these explicit science parks really comes down to Manuel Castells and Peter Hall, whose book Technopoles of the World in 1994 theorised this. There's others. There's Tim Bunnell's work and mine on semi-feudal cyber-colonialism, but it's really goes back to Capital, this thinking. What is it that is profitable in the knowledge industries? It's being first to have the innovation. After that, that's your ideas capital, so to speak. After that, it slowly diversifies and competition sets in. It leads to a crisis. The only way out of a crisis is to have another new round of innovation. That's why you needed a clever country in Australia in the 1980s, because capitalism had become stagnant. It needed a boost. So, in Vietnam, this is happening. How many of you have been to Saigon, Silicon City? No? It actually exists. This is from 2017. but it's been around for about 20 years, actually. They've been building this facility. It's in the north of the city, but it's only one of the research futures imagined for the development of advanced capitalism in the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. But of course, like any institution, it has a vision and mission. And the Prime Minister had talked about this when he established 3 national high-tech parks in Vietnam, going back some years now. And the idea was this would serve as a model for Vietnam technology innovation, intellectual capital development, and the innovation economy. We're talking about what we now call 4.0, right? Which is a thing that's more popular in Vietnam than really anywhere else, I think, talking about it in terms of 4.0. So when you use it, be aware of that. But it's about really innovating the economy. And the idea is that this model will advance Vietnam into the fully developed national status, which is admirable and important and so on. But we can still think critically about the way this is going about, being done. What are the ways to think about it? Now, we understand technological innovation is what you want to be the advanced sector. You don't want to be like when Malaysia set up its science park, it launched in California because the Malaysians knew well that if they don't recruit Microsoft or Netscape then was the big search engine, not like Google. Google didn't exist. If you don't locate them to your science park, you won't do anything more than get secondary production. You won't get the innovative part of, new ideas. You'll only get hived off first world to second to global south production, microchip production. And they were very worried about that. Please, a couple of minutes more before the break. The Malaysians were very worried about this because they thought if they couldn't get the Google campus, well, the Netscape campus as it was, to move to Malaysia, they would only see the facilities that they'd built be used for microchip production rather than innovation. And yes, why did Netscape want to move its production outside of America? It kept the innovative bit in its campus, became the Google campus eventually, and it sent production of microchips and hardware to the places where labor was cheap. American labor is not cheap. Americans won't work for squat. But Mahathir, the Prime Minister of the Prime Minister of Malaysia, he said that Malaysian women have generations of skill using their fingers for small, delicate work so they can do microchip production. What did he mean? He meant those generations of women have been doing basket weaving. Like there's a kind of racism built in there. He sold his own people to be cheap labor for the information industries. Very interesting. And a disaster. Now we're going to look at what happened at the experience of Saigon Silicon City, or it's now changed after a break. And I want in the break for you to put your brochures here on the table so we can all have a look at them. Maybe this table, and along these 4. So in the break, if you could put your brochures on here, we can all have a look at them, and then we'll go on and look at the rest of this. Okay, 10 minutes. Thank you. 10-minute break.